Back Look Cinema, the podcast.
He came and he stood below my window in the moonlight, and he promised me things, not in words, but by doing them, by making them happen. A red mist spread over the lawn, coming on like a flame of fire, and then he parted it, and I could see that there were thousands of rats with their eyes blazing red, like his, only smaller. Then he held up his hand, and they all stopped, and I thought he seemed to be saying, "Rats, rats, rats, thousands, millions of them, all red blood. All these I will give to you if you will obey me."
Oh my, that was difficult. I had to pause the recording because I was straining my vocal cords out, and I had a hearty cough after I finished that. So, as I say at the beginning of every show, my name is Zoe. It's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the United States. And welcome back, friends. This is the 159th episode of Back Look Cinema, the podcast. We take a look back at the movies of yesteryear, especially the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. If you like what you're about to hear, then please tell your family, tell your friends, and tell that tall, dark, and charming fellow standing over at the darkened corner with that peculiar East European accent. Go ahead and tell him. It's not like he's going to bite you. It's good to be back. Once again, the episode was a little late. Also, apologies for that. I'm still in the effort of trying to get back on track with recording and releasing episodes. And once again, no particular excuse. I would say that I got bogged down with a bunch of government paperwork to do. Paperwork that every American does, but to be sure, I procrastinated for like 2 days, and so I am slowly working out this time management thing. I'm glad that you're back. I'm glad that you've downloaded the show so we can get into the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about, and we're talking about the classic movie monsters for the month of October. Last week we talked about Frankenstein, and now we're going to talk about the movie that inspired Frankenstein, and that is Dracula, that came out in 1931. And it's one of those movies that I didn't actually watch from beginning to end. As with Frankenstein, they would start to show the film, and I was a child trying to watch it. And then as I was watching it, I would kind of lose interest and not watch it. And then kind of catch up on it. And most of this movie I have no real memory of. I only remember the very end of the film, and I remember having a sense of not really understanding it because I had already seen some of the latter Dracula films. I mean, I think that's kind of obvious for most people. Don't start their Dracula journey with the 1931 Dracula. Most people start maybe a 1970s version or a 1980s version. There have been dozens and dozens of stories of Dracula. I think a lot of people who are listening right now probably started with Bram Stoker's Dracula that was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And many people consider that a fantastic film. It was a film that I admittedly was a little bit underwhelmed by. I didn't fully enjoy it, and I think I need to do a rewatch of that film to get a greater appreciation for it. But for most people, as I've said, Dracula 1931 is not their first film, and so when you watch it, it's you're watching a very different take on a vampire, different in a sense that there are a lot of things that are implied in this version, that are implied in this movie, that they show you directly in other movies. It's like they show you, like, you don't really get to see all of, not even gore. Not, it's because obviously there's not going to be any gore, I guess, but there's not any of the things that you would associate Dracula doing directly. Everything, as I said, is implied. You have to use a lot of your imagination. And interestingly enough, for the audiences back then, Dracula was way too much. It was it was shocking. Back in these times, they didn't necessarily have a horror category, although there had been like horrific films. But the word that they would use to describe these movies would be like a suspense film, a suspense thriller, or a thriller movie. These movies were thrilling you. I was excited to see this movie. I was excited to basically experience or have a greater understanding for the character, because a lot of what we understand as Dracula is drawn from this movie. So let's get to talking about it. So let's go to our opening credits. In the old country of Transylvania, the folks are friendly but superstitious. At least one of their irrational beliefs may be grounded in reality. A local count by the name of Dracula is said to feed on human blood and take the form of mist, a werewolf, or a bat. In short, a vampire who only comes out at night, and the locals are loath to visit his castle. This dangerous figure has set upon spreading his influence by traveling to England. To be certain, there is a courageous man, Professor Van Helsing, who will stand in the way of this night creature and his unquenchable thirst. Dracula brings death, and death comes for us all. It's the only thing besides taxes of which one can be absolutely certain. So this movie, Dracula, was released February 14th, 1931, produced by Universal Pictures. It gained a profit of about $700,000 as best that I could tell. And that's $14 million a day. And the reported budget was $355 million, and that's $7 million a day. Now, when I usually report these numbers, I'm usually reporting the gross, but this doesn't report the gross. This reports the profit. So if I were to guess, I guess that the gross was probably around $1 million. So because that would include the profit plus the production budget, and probably a little bit more to consider for marketing. And so I'm guessing that perhaps it grossed a little over $1 million. But with the sources that I found, it only had the profit and not the gross. Apparently this gross reflects the original production run, and it was considered by everyone involved to be a major hit. This was a studio blockbuster before the term blockbusters was coined. It made a significant profit. The studios and the producers, they automatically wanted to make another horror movie. What they wanted to do was crank out horror as often as they could. So this movie came out in February, and then the next movie that they produced was Frankenstein, which came out later that same year. And then a few years later, they released the sequel to Frankenstein called The Bride of Frankenstein, and Dracula also had several sequels. So they really milked this cow. They created several franchises off of their monster movies. So let's get into this. So this movie was starring Bela Lugosi playing the titular Count Dracula. You may have also seen him in The Black Cat, Son of Frankenstein, and The Island of Lost Souls. Or not. I don't know what your movie habits are. Are you in the habit of watching movies that are almost 100 years old? Maybe. And that's going to go the same for most of these other movies. So buckle up, because we're going for a ride. Up next is Helen Chandler. She played Mina Stewart. That name is gooey, because I want to say Stewart, but the character's name is Mina Stewart. And she's been in, the actor Helen Chandler has been in Goodbye Again, Outward Bound, and A House Divided. David Manners plays John Harker. You may have seen him in The Mummy, The Death Kiss, or The Miracle Woman. And when I mention The Mummy, I'm talking about the original Mummy that came out, not all the other mummies. He was in the first Mummy movie. And I'll probably mention The Mummy a couple more times, and they're all referring to this first movie called The Mummy. Dwight Frye played Renfield. You may have also seen him in Bride of Frankenstein, Mystery Ship, or Frankenstein that I talked about last episode. In Frankenstein, he played Fritz, the Hunchback. Edward Van Sloan played Professor Abraham Van Helsing. He's also in The Mummy and The Working Man and Infernal Machine. Herbert Bunsen played Dr. Jack Seward. That is Mina's father. You may have also seen him in The Last of Mrs. Cheney, The Moonstone, or Vanity Fair. Frances Dodd played Lucy Wesson. She's been in Raffles, Grumpy, and Daughter of the Dragon. Joan Standing played the maid, and she's been in The Married Playground. It's called The Marriage Playground, Oliver Twist from 1922, and Greed. And then we have Charles K. Gerard. He played Martin. He's been in Journey's End, Richard the Lionhearted, and The Better Old. Dracula was directed by Todd Browning and Carl Frond. I'm sorry to be working this out as I record this. Once again, did not check on the pronunciation, because this guy is very important, and I shall explain. See, Browning, you may know him from directing Freaks, Outside the Law, London After Midnight, Mark of the Vampire, The Iron Man, not Iron Man, the superhero movie. It's a very old movie called The Iron Man. West of Zanzibar, and The Unknown, and he directed several more movies. And he is credited as directing this movie. However, Frond, he was the cinematographer, and he's credited as such. But apparently, according to oral tradition, the Dracula shoot was unorganized, and Browning left Frond to shoot most of this movie. Though he's only credited as the cinematographer, as I've said. But as a director, he's directed Mad Love, The Countess of Monte Cristo, The Mummy, I'm saying it again for the third time, also Madam Spy, and I Give My Love. So he kind of did multiple jobs. He was a cinematographer and he was a director, and he's done a bunch of uncredited directorial works, and he's uncredited as director in this film, but according to what people said at the time, he was basically the guy that was directing this movie. And now, because this movie was based on previous works, we have a bunch of people to thank for writing the movie. I had to unwrap the writers of this movie the same way that you would kind of peel an onion, because this movie have layers. The thing is, most movies have a bunch of layers. Most movies aren't written by just one guy. Usually just one guy gets the credit. But sometimes you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper to find out who should share in this responsibility. And I rarely start digging deep. But as I was like reading the credits and trying to figure out who wrote this movie, I realized that I had to go deeper because I wasn't going to get deep enough. So the movie was written by Bram Stoker, Hamilton Dean, John L. Balderson, and Garrett Fort. So Stoker is credited in every movie that features Dracula or related characters. And that is because he wrote the original novel. And this is the novel that he is most known for. But surprisingly, he has written other novels. I don't know if anybody's ever made any films or plays from his other novels, but he's done some other work, such as The Primrose Path, The Snake's Pass, The Mystery of the Sea, and Jewel of the Seven Stars, and several other books. So it is from him that this story comes. And then we go on to Hamilton Dean. He's a stage actor, and he wrote the play upon which the film was based. He was friends with the Stoker family. I believe that they actually kind of lived next to each other. And Stoker actually had been trying to make Dracula into a stage play for a little while. So Dean was able to pick up the reins, and he was able to write a really good stage play. He wrote Dracula, the vampire play, in 3 acts. It's his only written work. He didn't write any other plays. He didn't write any screenplays. And he really didn't star in that many movies. So the one work that he did do was a banger, because I think these people are in the UK, so it was written for the UK, for their audiences. This is a play that toured the UK. And Dean is particularly significant because it was his idea that Dracula should wear a tuxedo with a stand-up collar to believably blend in with London society. And he has a flowing cape to conceal Dracula when Dracula disappeared on stage. So the reason that we have Dracula with a cape was for practical reasons, because it makes it easier for him to appear to disappear in the stage play. By the time we get to the movies, it's merely an affectation. It's like, actually, people are used to seeing Dracula in a cape, so that's why Dracula's wearing a cape. and I don't think I would have it any other way. Next, we move on to Balderson. He rewrote the play for American audiences. It had to be rebooted for America, and it was also very popular in this country. He's also written Gaslight, and these are movies that he's written for. And Gaslight, some people remember this movie because that is the term. This is the movie where we get the term gaslighting from. So if somebody tells you that you're doing something that you're not doing, or something like that, it's like, you left the oven on. No, I didn't leave the oven on. Yes, you left the oven on. No, I did not see the oven on. You definitely left the oven on. See, that sort of thing. They're playing tricks on you, playing mind games. This is where that term comes from. He also wrote I'll Never Forget You, The Prisoner of Zenda, Frankenstein, and The Mummy. I had forgotten that he's credited with writing Frankenstein. And finally, we have Fort. And Fort is the person who is actually responsible for writing the screenplay or adapting the play written by Balderson into the movie that became Dracula. And Fort also wrote Applause, 12 Crowded Hours, The Devil Doll, The Mark of Zorro, and Ladies in Retirement. And I think, well, I definitely watched a movie called The Mark of Zorro, but I don't know which version this is. I don't know if it's the version that I watched when I was talking about it on a different podcast, or if this is an earlier version. There were many versions of The Mark of Zorro, and I didn't actually go into which version this was. Now we have the music by Heinz Rohmheld. He is uncredited. And just like in Frankenstein, there's hardly any music in this movie. There's a little bit in the beginning. There's a sparsely populated music here and there in the movie. And then there's some music at the end, like at the end credits. And I found out that there is a reason for that. There's a reason why there's hardly any music in the movie. And I'll tell you about it in the trivia. But Heinz Rohmheld also wrote or composed music for The Lady from Shanghai, it's called Melinda, The Strawberry Blonde, This Is Russia, The Tall Tea, There's Always Tomorrow, and Chicago's Calling. So that's it for the opening credits, and I don't have any particular announcements except that I would implore you to go visit backlickcinema.com/shop. Check out the merch over there. Plus, I still have my intent to open the eBay store. Think of it as a concept of a plan, and you'll get the idea. And those are the announcements I have for now, I think. And we're going to continue with our 5 favorite parts. So the thing about Dracula is that, like Frankenstein, it's a very short movie. It's about an hour and 10 minutes. It's about as long as a Game of Thrones episode. And it's very sparse on the story of Dracula. They adapted this from the stage play. They did have plans to make it into a huge, like they really wanted to adopt a novel, but Universal Pictures was kind of in financial trouble and they didn't want to take a risk on a huge production. So they chose to pare it down. And instead of trying to adapt a novel, they adapted the stage play. And the stage play really cut a lot of stuff out, right? You're just getting like the bare bone, the gist of the Dracula story, as it were. But you're getting, when you see Dracula, are just like the bare minimum Dracula story. And it's interesting because, like, for example, one of the things they cut out is why he's attracted to Mina Seward. They call her Mina Seward in this movie. So the only thing is that he's super attracted to her, and he wants to make her one of his vampires, and he kind of does that with all the women vampires. So it's like no particular, or all the women, I should say. He does that with all the women. It's like there's hardly any woman that he approaches that he doesn't like transform into a vampire. He doesn't. He rarely kills them outright. So I think that this is just a dude that's attracted to women, and that is part of the vampire lore, there's particularly Dracula. This is supposed to have a lot of sexual energy, and I imagine it's hard for me to fit into an audience member from 1931, but I can imagine as I don't want to say that they're uptight and stuff, but they're very reserved, as the general population was back in those times. I imagine seeing Dracula like approach a woman and putting them under his trance, and them having fainting spells around him or around circumstances of him. I imagine that would get the heart a fluttering. That's really exciting. So I have to take that into consideration when I see this. It's not as they couldn't be overtly sexual. They had to be subtle with it, and they basically had to have you use your imagination as you watch the film. Like, they show him coming close to the lady, but they're not going to actually show him biting the lady or actually killing a person. Like, it shows you he might be grappling with a person, and the camera kind of turns away, and then the next thing you know, somebody's falling down and they're dead. So they're not really trying to show you anything. They're trying to, I guess that was enough. I guess in 1931, that was enough. They really couldn't show you like the full Monty. It's like what's about to go down. You know this woman is about to die. He's about to suck her blood. You know what's going to happen. We're not going to show it to you. You already know. And they probably believed that they saw that. They probably, when they went to the movies, they probably thought that they saw Dracula suckling on a woman's neck. And that's not something that they actually showed in the movie. So I guess you know the basic story of Dracula. It's a count from Transylvania. People believe he's a vampire. He travels to England. Doesn't exactly say why. I imagine that he's just trying to expand his influence. It probably has a lot more in depth in the story. I'm not that familiar with the story of Dracula, but he travels to England, and he has what did they call it? Carfax Manor, I believe they called it. He buys that, and that's where he chooses to live. And immediately he finds the Seward family and starts to charm his way into their sphere of influence. And one of the reasons is because his assistant Mr. Renfield, had to be locked up in the Seward insane asylum, so he had to get access to Renfield. So he had to acclimate himself to Dr. Seward, because Dr. Seward is the CEO of this sanitarium, a mental institution in today's world. And he meets up with her friends. He meets up with Mina and Mina's best friend, and he's all taken back by these gorgeous women. So he immediately starts to turn the women into his vampires. He takes a special interest in Mina, but as he starts to get closer to Mina, he's being pursued by Van Helsing, and Van Helsing figures out that he's actually a vampire, and they start chasing him around, and then they corner him just as daybreak happens, and Dracula tries to hide from Van Helsing in one of his box-shaped coffins under his manor, but Van Helsing knows what Dracula is. He knows what Dracula's likely to be, and he goes searching for these boxes, and he finds Dracula comatose. So I imagine that in this version of Dracula, it's like the vampire is basically dead, like totally unresponsive to being disturbed. And then Van Helsing, like in his words, he destroys Dracula, he rescues Mina, and all is well. And that's basically the whole movie. It very short, very abrupt. That is the basic story, the Cliff Notes version, if you will, of the story of Dracula. So some of my favorite parts. In the beginning of the movie, you have Renfield, and I guess he's a real estate agent or an attaché. He's supposed to meet up with Count Dracula at Dracula's castle, and because he has the paperwork for this manor that the Count is buying in England. And he's on a carriage. He takes a carriage to a village, and the villagers, and he's not the only one in the carriage. He's there are a bunch of people on the carriage. They're going to that village, and he's a passenger. And when passengers disembark, everybody gets off, and the coach feels like he's done. Like he's about to either go back home or turn in for the night. He thinks his job is over. And Renfield is like, no, I'm going over to the pass because I'm supposed to meet Dracula. And the villager was like, no, you must not go. I really loved that part. I felt that the earnestness with which the villagers was imploring that Renfield not go to the castle. There was that genuine fear that they had. And I like that foreboding, that warning. Is kind of like a warning to the audience about what's about to happen. And they tell Renfield, like, he's a Dracula. He's not. That Dracula's a vampire, and that all his wives are vampire. He has multiple wives. There's a bunch of vampires out there. They kill people at night. Don't do it. We at least go tomorrow. On that particular night, it was like a superstitious night for these villagers. So they was like, at least go the next day. Don't go now. But Renfield insists that he must go. And he's able to convince the coach to take him to the pass. So they're not going all the way to the castle. They're going to basically a crossroads where they're supposed to meet up with a coach that represents the Count. So I like that. And that leads me, it's basically this whole first part. So they meet up. So when Renfield's coach gets to the crossroads, he tosses Renfield's bag out of the front, because the Renfield's bag is like in the front seat where he is. He just tosses Renfield's bag out the coach and then just keeps on going. Like he doesn't even really wait to see whether Renfield got out the coach. He doesn't. He throws out the bag and then he takes off. He stops for a brief moment, just barely enough time for a man to get out the coach. And then he takes off. And Renfield's trying to get his attention. Hey, sir, and the guy is gone because he's not hanging around. And there's another coach there already. And we already know this is Dracula. We saw him early. We saw his reveal, which is also part of this whole thing's my favorite part. So we also the Dracula reveal was pretty awesome. Like when you see him for the first time, it's very well shot, very theatrical way of introducing Dracula. And it was they introduced Dracula and his wife. So you see him, and then you see him again as this coach driver. Now, obviously, Renfield's never seen the Count before, and so he just sees this strange coach driver. He's kind of wrapped up in robes and whatnot, and he grabs his bag and they just start taking off, and the ride gets all bumpy, and Renfield wants to complain, so he leans out the window to yell at the coach driver to slow down. And then he doesn't lean all the way out to see the coach driver because his attention is distracted. Because when he leans out and looks, he sees that the horses are being led by a bat. like a really big bat. Like this bat is flying in front of the horses, and the horses are following, and he's like, well, he kind of has this expression like that's not what you see every day, and so I really enjoyed all of that. That whole. I don't know if you would call that the first act. It's not the. It's like the very beginning to like the middle of the first act. I liked all of that. Well, maybe all of that was the first act. I can't tell you because Dracula only has 3 acts. So I think it makes sense to me that this would be the middle of the first act. Another thing that I think we all like is that this movie takes its time, and you got to be careful with your pacing in the movies, right? So sometimes when a movie is slowly paced, it is very difficult to keep your composure. Like you might get restless or you might get impatient. You're trying to get the movie to hurry along because, you know, you just don't want to see people just standing around or talking about something boring. There has to be something going on. There has to be some dialogue, or there has to be a very interesting scene that you're seeing. It has to be, when a movie is slowly paced, then it should be something that's worth taking your time. And I think with this movie, it's probably the big takeaway is is it the cinematography? Is it the way it's shot? I think maybe that's it. I think maybe that's what draws me to the movie. But I like that it takes its time. I think that it's queuing on the suspense and queuing on the thrills. It's kind of like revving you up because it'll show you Dracula just staring, and he has that stare, and he has a way of just moving slowly. The movie takes its time. The movie takes its time because Dracula takes his time. He walks slowly. He moves slowly. He talks slowly. He's very deliberate in his movement, and so too is the movie deliberate in its movement. And there was something about that I enjoyed watching this movie. So that's another thing that I really liked about this movie. I just want to also note that I really wanted to research this, but I never got around to it, so maybe you can do it. But in this movie, the boat that he was on when he went from Transylvania to England was called the Vesta. But in the other movie, there was a movie that was just out, and it was called The Last Voyage of the Demeter. And I imagine that the name of the ship that they were on in that movie is called the Demeter. I'm pretty sure it is. I haven't seen the movie, but I think I've seen a couple of reviews and heard a couple of podcasts of people talking about this particular movie. So I'm kind of wondering if what's it called in the novel? Is it called the Vesta? Is it called the Vesta in the novel, or is it called the Demeter? And if they changed the name, why did they change the name? Because I didn't find out about that. And when I was reading the trivia, I didn't read all of the trivia, but I figured that would pop up, and it never popped up in the little bit that I've read. And I didn't do further research on it. So maybe you can do the research and find out the answer to this particular question. Another one of another one of our favorite things, because I imagine that if you were watching this movie with me, you would enjoy this too. One of our favorite things is Dwight Frye playing Renfield. In the beginning of the movie, he's playing a perfectly normal dude, just a normal chap. The bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. He's like a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed business dude, just normal, just playing a regular guy. And then after he's transformed by Dracula, he's crazy. He's what I read at the when I started the show was the rat's speech that he gives about Dracula offering him rats. So Renfield here's the thing. Here's the connection that I'm starting to make. And me not paying attention to the movie or not being cognizant and realizing that Renfield feeds on rats and flies and insects, mostly insects. He has after he's bitten by Dracula, he has a fascination for insects. So that's one of the reasons why he's kept in the mental institution. And he's given this speech about Dracula offering him like rats, just thousands of rats for him to feed off of their blood. And that's what he's doing with the insects. He's just sucking the insect's blood. I don't know how you get blood from an insect without just eating the insect. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because there was a movie that just came out called Renfield that I didn't see. But one of the things that I saw in the trailer was that Renfield ate rats. And he ate flies. And when he ate the flies, he got superpowers or something. He was faster or stronger or something. He needed to eat insects in order to get his special abilities. And I didn't realize that was part of the original lore. It is certainly part of this movie. Well, the part about him eating insects, not about him having super strength. Or did he? I'm not, because he kept escaping his confinements. And I think they said something about him bending bars. I'm not exactly sure. They were all too nonchalant about it. But he's definitely resourceful. Maybe he gets a little extra resourceful when he drinks the blood of flies. Anyway, that character and that actor was he was fascinating. He was a fascinating individual, and unfortunately, he may have played the role too real. It may have been to his detriment. Another one of our favorite parts is this is definitely in the third act, near the end of the movie. This was Van Helsing confronting Dracula. This is when they actually out him as a vampire, right? They actually because before, throughout the whole time that Dracula is in England and basically hanging around the Seward family, essentially Dr. Seward and his daughter Mina Seward, and then Mina Seward's fiance John Harker, just milling about, just inserting himself into the family, basically. Van Helsing is trying to figure out, I think this dude is a vampire, and goes out of his way is trying to prove that Dracula is in fact a vampire. And then the confrontation when it's kind of out in the open, where they know that he's a vampire. He's kind of proven it. He did the mirror trick where he's trying to catch Dracula's reflection in the mirror, and there's no reflection, and he's able to ward Dracula away with this weed called Wolfsbane, and then he's able to further ward Dracula away with an actual crucifix. So, just proving over and over again that the Count is a vampire. So when Dracula is exposed, and not really exposed to everybody, just exposed to Dracula himself, he's telling Dracula, I know who you are. So they're basically alone in the room, and after they have this tense conversation, Dracula attempts to hypnotize him. So he gets that stare in his eye, and he says, come here. And Van Helsing resists. So Dracula stretches out his hands, and his fingers are all crooked, and he says, come here. And then Van Helsing starts to step towards Dracula, slowly and jerkily. He's coming to the vampire, and then he stops himself and starts to walk backwards. And then Dracula recognizes that Van Helsing has a very strong will. So
I like that scene. That was a great part. I mean, really, the whole thing of them exposing Dracula and you're like having theories and testing out the theories and coming to conclusions about who Count Dracula is. That was all great. And there was a whole thing about him turning Mina into a vampire and then them doing whatever they could to protect Mina. Oh, there was one part. Okay, this might be six favorite parts, because I totally forgot about this part, and I want to insert it here. So this is going to be a sixth one. So there was a scene where this is after Mina Harker and I'm sorry, not Mina Harker, Mina Seward and her best friend. Trying to figure out what her name is. I guess it's Lucy. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Lucy. So Mina Seward and her best friend Lucy Weston, they're at a play and they're with their father. And I think Van Helsing, I don't know if Van Helsing is there, but anyway, they're in a audience box, or what do you call that? A balcony. They're in the balcony because they're rich, and they're watching the play, and Count Dracula he's at the theater, he's walking around, he goes up to the balcony, introduces himself. Hello, I'm Count Dracula. He has the accent and everything. And then he chit chats with them. He's charming Lucy. Like, Lucy is really charmed by Dracula, and Mina is not so much. Like, Mina has a fiance, and she kind of figures that, Dracula is just I don't know. It's that thing where, like, a dude is hitting on your best friend, and it's like, you looking at this dude, it's like, yeah, we see what you're doing. And I think that's the attitude that Mina has towards the Count. But later on, the scene opens with Mina making fun of Dracula's accent. And so I was surprising. I didn't realize that was going to be in this movie. She's walking around talking about, I'm Count Dracula. And she's laughing and giggling. But Lisa isn't having it. Lisa is totally infatuated with the Count. But it was so funny that they have that scene where she's making fun of the accent. That was charming. I really liked that. And this movie had some levity in it. It could have been in a rom-com. It was very good, very well done. I like that. So the last thing I want to talk about, well, it's not the last thing I want to talk about. It's the last of one of our favorite parts. And then I want to get into some things I noticed, some minor criticisms, as it were. But this is like the final chase. And the reason that I wanted to note this is that this was the part that I remembered, at least the very end of it. I remember this part where Van Helsing and John Harker are like chasing Dracula. Like, he's found out. Lucy has been turned to a vampire and is going around killing babies, right? And they don't find her. They just find the dead babies, but they don't really find her. And Dracula has Mina in his clutches, and he's running with her, and he's going to run to his abbey, and Van Helsing and Harker are far behind him. Like, he's basically out of their sight. And I think what they do is they actually follow Renfield, because Renfield knows where the Count is. Renfield has broken out of the sanitarium, and they follow Renfield to the Carfax Manor, or whatever it's called, where Dracula is staying. Renfield gets into the manor, and he starts walking up this long winding staircase that's up against the wall, and Van Helsing and Harker, they're on the outside of the abbey, but they see like a window. And so they look through the window, and they see they found Dracula with Mina Harker. I mean, not Harker. I keep saying that. With Mina Seward. So they find their way into the manor, and they're
trying to confront Dracula. And then when Dracula notices that, he's been found. He did not expect that. He's been found. He blames Renfield because Renfield led them there, right? And Renfield is begging for his life, like, please don't, master. I didn't know that they were following me. Please don't kill me. But Dracula is slowly approaching him and then grabs him and kind of squeezes him and chokes him. And then you don't really see what happens. The next scene you see is Renfield falling down the stairs, right? and Renfield is dead. I think he starts carrying Mina at this point. He carries Mina downstairs. He goes into like it feels like an underground chamber or like a basement chamber. It's kind of, because it looks like it's dirt, like it's wherever they're at, it's a dirt floor. Van Helsing and Harker are far behind, but they're in the building. And so they get into the same chamber and they start looking for the both of them. Harker's calling out Mina's name, like, Mina, where are you? And she's not answering. And there are these boxes there. And so Van Helsing starts opening up the boxes. And in one of them, he finds Dracula just comatose. It's like, it's hard to describe him as sleeping, because it's like, if you're sleeping, because you don't feel like, I feel like regular people don't go to bed as soon as they lay down, right? But it was the morning. So when Van Helsing opened the box and Dracula was inside, Dracula is like not reacting. It's like he's basically comatose. And they look in the other boxes. They don't find Mina in the boxes. And so Van Helsing, he's like very different in this movie than in other movies. Because in other movies, he kind of looks like a Indiana Jones type dude. But in this movie, he's a professor and he looks and dressed like he's the other end of Indiana Jones. It's like if Indiana Jones didn't put on a leather jacket and carried a whip, or he has no implements for destroying vampires. So he has to jury rig one. He has to MacGyver a stake and a hammer. So he finds some wood. He breaks it up so that it has splinters so he could have a stake. And then he finds I think it's Harker or somebody finds a large iron bar that he could use as a hammer. And off screen, you could hear the impact of him driving the stake through Dracula's heart. And then you could hear Dracula moaning. Is like he only reacts as he's being killed. But it's something you have to imagine. You don't get to see it. So instead of seeing this scene, you see Harker running around looking for Mina, and then he finds Mina. And once Dracula is destroyed, the spell is broken. And the movie ends like there are a couple of words like Mina and says to John, "Oh, the spell is broken. We're free." And I think John says something like, "Doctor, won't you come along with us? Let's get out of here." And John says that to Van Helsing. And Van Helsing says, "No, there's something I got to do first." And then the movie ends. It's like the end. I was like, that was abrupt. But I did like seeing how they did horror back then. I like that. They couldn't show people like actual vampire biting the neck, as I said earlier, or somebody actually driving the stake into somebody's heart. Like it's almost like with the next when Dracula movies got into modern times, they couldn't wait to show somebody driving a stake through a vampire's heart and the blood squirting up and spurts. They couldn't wait to show that. But back then, it just wasn't done. There are a lot of things that they couldn't show. So one of the things that they did was there was a lot of them having Dracula transform from a human to a bat. And while back in the day, the special effect of an actual bat may have thrilled audiences, when I look at it now, and what you might see when you watch it is that it's very clearly like a rubber bat that somebody's jerking up and down from high from the ceiling so that the bat looks like it's flapping its wings. So like bats don't even fly like that. They tend to, well, I'm generalizing, I guess. Maybe some bats fly like that, but the bats that I've seen, they have a tendency to flutter. Like they're kind of like fluttering around because they're constantly on the hunt for insects, and I think they could be easily distracted by insects. But I suppose some bats, like the kind that don't necessarily hunt insects, probably have a different mode of flying. But still, you could clearly see that somebody was jerking up a bat puppet up and down by a string to make it look like the bat was flapping its wings. I'm bringing all of this up because of the effect of the vampire changing to different things, primarily the bat. So what they would do is that they would show the bat maybe flying into Mina's room, and then they would show Mina on the bed, and then they would pan the camera around, and then it would just be Dracula standing there, right? They didn't bother showing the transformation, which obviously there's limitations with special effects because they were doing this movie on a budget. But at the same time, it reminded me of The Good Place. And in The Good Place, if you've seen it, they have this like all-knowing, it's kind of hard to explain it because she's always saying that she's not a woman, but she's essentially an all-knowing robot. Like she's kind of like an AI robot thingy, helper person. And if somebody in A Good Place wanted to call her, they would just say, "Hey, Janet," and then she would just instantly appear. But what they would do is they would have the camera on the person requesting Janet and the tight shot. And then after he said it, suddenly there's a wide shot and she's standing there. And they did it so often. It's such a sudden effect that you really felt like she kind of popped into existence before your eyes, but they never actually showed her popping into existence. They would do that all the time. They would have the camera looking one way, and then somebody would call for Janet, and then suddenly, after all they did was change where the camera was pointing, and Janet was there. And I think the effect was she didn't walk there. Like she's not walking into the scene. She's just standing there. And that's such a startling effect, and it worked extremely well. And the same thing happened with Dracula. It's like, I think the reason that it works so well is that when they show him, he's just standing there. He's not walking into the scene after his transformation. The camera pans over to him and he's just there. And it's very effective. There's also a thing where he changed to a wolf, but they never show the wolf or show him changing to a wolf. You only hear the wolves or a wolf. You only hear it, and is heavily implied that wolf is Dracula. So that's one of the things I wanted to comment on. The other thing was that, and this is more of a criticism, but there's a scene in the movie where Dracula kills this one girl, and then he kills Lucy. Well, I think he just turns Lucy into a vampire. And after Lucy is discovered dead, they open up on it's like a doctor's operating theater, right? It's like doctors, and they're doing an autopsy on the dead body, and up in the upper deck surrounding where the doctors are below, it's like students are looking down and they're studying this marvelous phenomenon where this woman has been drained of blood. And I think it's think I'm not sure if Dr. Seward's there or not, because he's not that type of doctor. He's not a was. I never got the impression that he was a medical doctor on the film. So in the scene, Lucy is like her body is being examined. So she's clearly dead, or people think that she's dead, but they don't really talk about it in the rest of the movie. Like after her death, there's nobody mourning, there's nobody weeping. Mina isn't crying because this was her friend. And nobody's terribly upset about it. It's like she's just gone and nobody comments on it. So that's remarkable. And they think that she's dead because later it comes up that, you know, they're asking they're asking Mina about Lucy, and well, actually they're asking Mina about the woman in white that the newspapers have accused her. They've accused this woman in white of killing children, and they're asking Mina about it, and Mina said that it's probably Lucy. So they know Lucy is dead. They're just not broken up about it. So that's definitely missing from this movie. You're like, wait a minute, didn't somebody just die? What, nobody's upset about it? So that's light criticism, I guess. That's the only thing I wanted to remark. So that's it for our favorite parts and some commentary. And now we're going to find out what the trivia is, the top 10 trivia, as it were, the trivia as can be found on IMDb. So I found 10 of some of the most interesting trivia, so let's get into it. After playing Renfield, Dwight Fry would find himself typecast. He found himself restricted to playing eccentric or jittery characters that had a manic edge to them, or criminal lunatic types. So that's what I meant when I said that maybe he did too good as Renfield. After Renfield, probably the next time you see him is in Frankenstein, where again, he's kind of playing an odd character and he's kind of like stuck in those roles. So yay for having work, but it's kind of a shame that you can't play like a normal person. Generally regarded as the film that kickstarted the horror genre in Hollywood. I'm pretty sure that there was a silent film on Nosferatu before this one, but Nosferatu was not a Hollywood film, and perhaps there was a couple of other silent horror films, but Dracula was really the one that was like, we got something over here. And the scene where Dracula and Renfield are traveling to London by boat, the footage that is shown is borrowed from a Universal silent film called The Stormbreaker from 1925. Silent films were projected at a different frame rate per second than that was later adopted for sound films, accounting for the jerky movements and the quicker than normal action of the shots. The original release featured an epilogue with Edward von Sloan talking to the audience about what they have just seen. This was removed from the 1938 re-release and is now assumed lost. The later Frankenstein from 1931 similarly copied this mode by featuring a prologue. I had mentioned that when I talked about Frankenstein from the last episode. Among the living creatures seen in Dracula's castle in Transylvania are possums, armadillos, and an insect known as a Jerusalem cricket. This insect was common in Southern California, which may explain its cameo in the film. The inclusion of the armadillo was due to the fact that armadillos had occasionally been seen digging in graveyards, which led to the mistaken belief that they would dig their way into coffins and eat the cadavers. Yeah, here's the thing. Possums, armadillos, and Jerusalem crickets are native to the southern United States and Mexico. they found some animals around California and they were like, yeah, let's put this in the movie, because I'm looking at the armadillo and I was like, that's clearly not an animal from Transylvania, but they had to do what they had to do. Bela Lugosi was so eager to repeat his stage success and play the Count Dracula role for the film version that he agreed to a contract paying him $500 a week for a 7-week shooting schedule, a paltry sum even during the days of the Depression. In fact, his salary was only 1/4 of the actor David Manners, who played Jonathan Harker. However, this fact might be misleading. Although David Manners earned $2,000 a week, he likely didn't pocket all that money. Manners was under contract to Warner Brothers / First National, which had loaned out their contract player at a rate considerably higher than the performer's weekly salary. Hence, much of Manners' salary went directly to Warner Brothers / First National. I think I mentioned something about this before, about actors, when they signed a contract with a studio, it was usually an exclusive contract. And if they wanted to do a movie at another studio, or if another studio wanted one of their contract players, the studio that had the actor had to agree to it. Like they had to, they had to give their permission for the actor to go and play in this other movie. When Bela Lugosi died in 1956, he was buried wearing one of his many black silk capes, but not the one that he wore in Dracula. That one was put out on auction by his son Bela Lugosi Jr. in 2011. The starting bid being set at $1,200,000. It failed to sell. Later in November 2019, the family donated it to the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, where it is being restored as of February 2020. I do not know the circumstance of the thing now. I don't know what happened to it. I don't know if they're still restoring it or if it's on display. I actually did a little bit of trying to find out what happened with the cape, and I wasn't able to. So as of 2020, it should be put on display with an exclusive collection of prestigious and priceless golden age of Hollywood star props and artifacts. It ought to be noted that there was a persistent yet untrue rumor that being buried in one of his vampire capes was Lugosi's dying wish, when, in fact, it was decided by Bela Lugosi Jr. and his mother, Lugosi's ex-wife, Lillian Arch. Lugosi family has long collaborated. The Lugosi family has long corroborated these facts to be accurate. Dracula never once blinks his eyes, an effect that enhances the undead's character's otherworldly aura, abetted by Bela Lugosi's famous menacing stare. Cinematographer Carl Fraud achieved the effect of Dracula's hypnotic stare by aiming 2 pencil spotlights into Bela Lugosi's eyes. Now, according to this trivia, he never blinks, but his eyes do look like they flicker at least a couple of times in the movie. And maybe that was like involuntary. The large expansive sets built for the Transylvania Castle and Carfax Abbey sequences remain standing after filming was completed and were used by Universal Pictures for many other movies for over a decade. There was no real musical soundtrack. So this last bit of trivia is what I was referring to earlier as to why both Dracula and Frankenstein were mostly silent. Well, as far as there wasn't any background music. There was no real musical soundtrack in the film because it was believed that with sound being such a recent innovation in films, the audience would not accept hearing music in a scene if there was no explanation for it being there. For example, the orchestra playing off camera when Dracula meets Mina at the theater. in an early era of sound, all music had to be diegetic. So they were afraid that if they had non-diegetic music, that the audience would be confused. They was like, there has to be a reason for this music. It doesn't make any sense that I'm hearing music, but nobody's playing music. They do have like non-diegetic music. That is music that the audience can hear, but the characters can't hear at the opening credits and the ending credits. But during the movie, because there are no characters in either of those instances, but during the movie, like the only time they actually play music is when there's an implication that there's an orchestra there. Like they don't show the orchestra, but the scene is at a theater. So while they're at the theater, you're expecting to hear some music. So that's an explanation for why there's music there. And then there's another scene where there's like sort of a band. I think this is at the wedding. And so there's a band at the wedding. So there's a reason that the audience hears music. So they had to gin up an explanation for why you're hearing music in this particular scene. So a far cry from the way we enjoy movies today, where the music never stops, right? It just keeps on going, and it's awesome. So that's it for the trivia. Let's check out what the critics thought. So the critics on Rotten Tomatoes had it at 94%. What we're now calling the popcorn meter is at 82%. And on IMDb reviews, it's at 7.1 out of 10. Paul Chambers from Movie Chambers wrote, Bela Lugosi gives his greatest performance as the mesmerizing menace from Transylvania. Dracula chilled audiences in the 1930s, and it still gives me goosebumps. David Newsar from Real Films Reviews wrote, it's clear that the movie simply doesn't hold up terribly well all these years later. You know, I can see how somebody might say that. I'm not going to poo-poo his experience with this movie. Cole Smithy from ColeSmithy.com wrote, stark, cold, and deeply sensual, Dracula's atmosphere and intention is rooted in a fear of unknown lust and desire from which there can be no escape. To view Dracula is to be bitten by the vampire's desperate attack. All right. I think I like that assessment. At last, we have Tim Brayton from Antagony and Ecstasy. He wrote, a perfect example of the worst traits of Hollywood films in the early sound era. Now, I didn't dig deep in why he would feel this way, but I don't think this is the case. Finally, Dracula is, as of this recording, available with a subscription on Amazon Prime Video. That's it for today. Next week, we continue our horror-themed October with a sequel to a bona fide horror hit, The Bride of Frankenstein. You can follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Please contact us at any questions or with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlickcinema.com. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like or subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. One last time, if you like this show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlick Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe. Share a movie from yesteryear with your family. Hug your loved ones. And if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.